May 10, 2011, the Ocean Mirage cruise ship floated effortlessly under the Caribbean sun, its decks alive with the chatter of passengers enjoying their morning routines. The smell of fresh coffee and salty ocean air mixed in the breeze as travelers gathered for breakfast, unaware that something was terribly wrong. At exactly 8 a.m., a cabin steward made his way down the elegant corridor of Deck 7, his cart stacked with neatly folded towels and fresh linens. His shift had been routine so far, nothing out of the ordinary, until he reached Suite 7419. He knocked once, then twice. Silence. Something felt off. Most honeymooners were still asleep at this hour, but the eerie stillness behind the door sent a chill down his spine. A "Do Not Disturb" sign hung on the handle, but it had been there since the night before. Protocol allowed stewards to enter if guests did not respond, so he pulled out his keycard and slid it through the lock. The door beeped. The latch clicked. Open. The moment he stepped inside, his breath caught in his throat. The room was half lived in, yet strangely abandoned. The king-sized bed was unmade, the covers thrown to one side, as if someone had gotten up in a hurry. A half-empty champagne bottle stood on the nightstand, its contents untouched. A pair of women's sandals lay overturned by the entrance, one of them oddly damp. But the most chilling sight was the trail of red-tinted water leading from the bathroom toward the balcony. His hands trembled as he took a step forward. The bathroom sink was smeared with something dark, almost as if someone had tried to wash it away, but hadn't done a good enough job. His gaze drifted to the glass balcony door. It was open, the thin white curtains billowing gently in the wind. He moved forward cautiously, stepping onto the balcony and peered over the edge. Nothing but endless rolling waves below. His stomach twisted. Something was wrong, very wrong. By 8:10 a.m. he stumbled out of the suite, his heart pounding, searching for the nearest security officer. Within minutes, the ship's security team was inside Suite 7419, scanning the eerie crime scene. Their radios buzzed with tense whispers, their movements sharp, urgent. By 8:45 a.m., an announcement echoed through the cruise ship's speakers, cutting through the casual breakfast conversations and morning music. Attention passengers, this is a security announcement. If anyone has seen Lillian Carter, please report to the front desk immediately. Forks clattered onto plates. Murmurs spread through the dining halls. People glanced around in confusion, some exchanging nervous looks. Who was Lillian Carter, and why was she missing? At 9:15 a.m., security officers found her husband, Brandon Carter, sitting alone in the ship's main dining area, sipping black coffee. They approached him carefully. "Mr. Carter, your wife has been reported missing. When was the last time you saw her?" Brandon Carter looked up, his expression unreadable. There was a long pause. Then, in a voice too calm for the situation, he said, "Last night. She said she was going to get some air. I thought she came back, but she never did." And in that moment, the investigators knew this wasn't just a missing person case. This was something much, much darker. Lillian Carter had always believed in love, the kind that swept you off your feet, the kind that made life feel like a dream. And for a while, she thought she had found it. Brandon Carter was everything she had ever wanted: successful, charming, confident. A Miami attorney with a magnetic presence, he had a way of making people believe in him, of convincing them that he was exactly who they needed him to be. That was how he had won Lillian over, not just with his words, but with the way he made her feel special, chosen. Their relationship moved fast, too fast. In December 2010, Brandon had proposed in front, of friends and family at an extravagant holiday party. A 2-carat diamond sparkled on her finger, a picture-perfect moment. Lillian had laughed through tears of joy, believing she had found the man she would spend the rest of her life with. But behind the flawless smiles and expensive gifts, small cracks had already begun to form. At first, they were barely noticeable, little things easily dismissed. Brandon had a temper, but he never raised his voice in public. He was controlling, but in a way that could be mistaken for protectiveness. Whenever Lillian made plans with friends, he wanted to know every detail. Whenever she didn't pick up his calls immediately, he asked too many questions. Then came the jealousy. In March 2011, just 2 months before the wedding, Lillian had gone out for drinks with a few girlfriends. Nothing unusual, but when she got home, Brandon had been waiting. His smile was tight, his voice was calm. Too calm. "You didn't answer my call," he said. Lillian had laughed, brushing it off. "I didn't hear it. The bar was loud." Brandon had nodded, but his grip on her wrist was just a little too firm. "You shouldn't be out so late. People talk." Lillian had ignored the unease creeping up her spine. "He's just protective," she told herself. "He loves me." By May 2011, they were boarding the Ocean Mirage for their honeymoon, a luxurious week-long escape through the Caribbean. It should have been paradise, but the cracks had widened into something impossible to ignore. From the moment they stepped onto the cruise ship, people noticed the tension. At first glance, they were the perfect newlyweds, holding hands, smiling. For photos, sipping champagne on deck. But for those who paid closer attention, something was off. The staff had seen it. The way Lillian flinched when Brandon touched her arm. The way her smile never quite reached her eyes. On May 7, 2011, 3 days into the trip, the first real signs of trouble became impossible to ignore. It happened at the Moonlight Casino. Lillian and Brandon had been playing roulette, surrounded by other passengers, the air thick with the clinking of glasses and murmurs of excitement. At first, they seemed like any other couple, whispering, laughing, sharing private jokes. But then, the mood shifted. The whispers turned into sharp, hushed words. A nearby guest would later recall the moment everything changed. "I just heard her say something like, 'I know what you did.'" Then Lillian's hand came up fast, a sharp slap. The sound echoed over the music. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, eyes widened. Brandon stood frozen for a second, his jaw clenched, his fist tightening at his sides. Then in an instant he smiled again, cool, controlled, like nothing had happened. He leaned in, whispered something into Lillian's ear. For a moment it looked like he had regained control. But Lillian's face was pale, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. She turned, walked away without looking back. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Something wasn't right. The next night, May 8, 2011, Lillian was seen alone at the Sunset Bar, staring out at the water. A bartender who served her that evening later said she was tracing the rim of her glass over and over, just lost in thought, like she was somewhere else. One guest, a woman named Isabel Romero, had approached her. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Lillian had forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired," but she wasn't tired. She was unraveling, and 2 days later, she would be gone. By the time May 9th, 2011 arrived, the whispers had started. Passengers were noticing. Staff was talking. Lillian and Brandon weren't just another honeymoon couple. They were a ticking time bomb, and soon everything would explode. May 9th, 2011, the last night Lillian Carter was ever seen alive. The Ocean Mirage sailed smoothly through the Caribbean, its decks glowing under soft golden lights as couples danced in the VIP lounge, laughter and music filling the air. To most, it was just another perfect night at sea. But for Lillian, it was something else, the end of something, or maybe the beginning of something far worse. She had spent most of the evening alone. The sunset bar, the infinity pool deck, the quiet corners where she could escape the tension that had been building for days. She had been avoiding Brandon, and the people around her had noticed. The once inseparable newlyweds now moved like strangers on the ship. Passengers whispered about the slap in the casino, about the forced smiles at dinner. A honeymoon wasn't supposed to feel like this. Isabel Romero, a guest from Argentina, had been the first to notice something strange that night. She had been seated near the bar when she spotted Brandon across the room. But he wasn't alone. He stood close to a woman, not Lillian. A woman younger, striking, dressed in a sleek red dress. Their conversation was quiet, their body language intimate. Isabel saw it clearly. The way the woman's fingers traced the rim of her wine glass, the way she leaned in, close enough that only Brandon could hear what she was saying. And then Isabel saw something else. Lillian. She was standing at the other end of the lounge watching. Her expression was unreadable at first, but then something changed. Her shoulders squared, her fingers curled into her clutch, her jaw tightened. She turned sharply and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Less than an hour later, security footage captured Lillian and Brandon near the infinity pool. It was 12:47 a.m. Lillian was clutching something in her hand, a small silver necklace. She was talking fast, her body tense, her gestures sharp. The camera had no audio, but her emotions were clear. She was angry. Brandon, standing just a few feet away, barely moved. His posture was calm, detached, his arms crossed. The contrast between them was unsettling, one unraveling, the other completely in control. Several guests were still awake at that time, some lingering near the pool, others enjoying late-night drinks at the bar. A few recalled noticing Lillian's distress. Her voice had risen just enough to draw attention, though not enough to make out her words. One passenger would later tell investigators, "I don't know what she was saying, but I remember her face. She looked trapped." At 1:02 a.m., security footage showed Lillian turning and walking away from Brandon. Her steps were fast, uneven, like she was trying to get away from him. She moved toward the hallway leading to their suite, disappearing. Around the corner at 1:04 a.m., Brandon followed. At 1:29 a.m., the door to suite 7419 opened. The balcony door slid open. A shadowy figure stepped outside. The camera angle made it impossible to tell if it was Lillian or Brandon. The dim lighting blurred the details. The figure stood there for several seconds, motionless, staring out at the dark, endless ocean. Then, at 1:36 a.m., the balcony door slid shut. That was the last time anyone saw Lillian Carter. When the ship docked in St. Thomas the next morning, she was gone. Her suitcase untouched, her passport still in the room, her sandals overturned near the door, the bed stripped of its sheets. Brandon Carter claimed he never heard her leave, but no one believed him. The Ocean Mirage had docked in St. Thomas, but there was no sign of Lillian Carter. The once lively honeymoon suite now felt like a crime scene, frozen in time. Her suitcase remained unpacked, her passport untouched, her personal belongings left exactly where she had placed them. But Lillian was gone. The tension on the ship was palpable, whispers spreading like wildfire through the corridors. Guests who had enjoyed their morning coffee just hours earlier were now staring at the missing person posters being handed out by security. At 9:15 a.m., Brandon Carter sat in the ship's dining area, too calm for a man whose wife had just disappeared. When security approached, his reaction was unsettling. No panic, no urgency. Just a deep breath before answering their questions. He told them he last saw Lillian around 1:30 a.m. when she mentioned stepping out for some air. He assumed she had come back while he was asleep. But his story didn't make sense. Investigators checked security footage from the night before. The cameras near the main exits showed no sign of Lillian leaving the ship. If she had walked out onto the decks, she would have been seen. If she had gone to a bar, a lounge, anywhere, there would be evidence. But there was nothing. The only recorded movement from Suite 7419 after 1:30 a.m. was the balcony door sliding open. The room itself raised even more questions. Forensics found small specks of blood near the balcony railing, not enough to indicate a violent struggle, but enough to suggest something had happened. Even more disturbing, the bedsheets were missing. Housekeeping logs confirmed they had not entered the room since the previous morning. So why had the sheets disappeared in the middle of the night? By May 12, 2011, 48 hours had passed since Lillian was last seen. The U.S. Coast Guard had searched miles of open water. Nothing. No body, no clothing, no trace. The investigation was no longer about finding her. It was about proving what had happened to her. Brandon's demeanor began to shift under questioning. At first, he was composed, but as inconsistencies in his story surfaced, so did his frustration. Investigators noticed how he kept rubbing his wedding ring absent-mindedly, how his fingers twitched when asked specific details. When they asked what Lillian was wearing that night, he hesitated. Too long. When they asked if they had argued, he shrugged, calling it a normal couple's disagreement. But passengers had already reported seeing Lillian slap him in public just nights before. Then came the biggest breakthrough. Inside Lillian's handbag, tucked away in a small side pocket, investigators found a note. A single piece of paper, handwritten, in Lillian's delicate script. If something happens to me, tell my sister Gina I was right. Tell her I knew the truth about Brandon. Tell her I knew everything. The weight of those words changed the case. This wasn't just a missing person report anymore. This was murder, and Brandon Carter was the only person left to tell her story. The walls were closing in on Brandon Carter. For days, he had played the role of the grieving husband, answering questions with carefully chosen words, feigning confusion and keeping his emotions controlled. But now the evidence was telling a different story. Lillian Carter hadn't simply vanished. She had been erased. Investigators pieced together the events of May 9, 2011, the night Lillian was last seen. Security footage confirmed that she had been arguing with Brandon near the infinity pool at 12:47 a.m. By 1:02 a.m., she had stormed away, heading back to their suite. Brandon followed just 2 minutes later. Then the final crucial timestamp, 1:29 a.m. The balcony door opened. A figure stepped out. The poor lighting made it impossible to confirm who it was, but the figure stood motionless for several seconds, staring at the dark ocean below. Then at 1:36 a.m. the balcony door slid shut. That was the last recorded movement from Suite 7419. Forensics had already found traces of blood near the railing, but the most chilling discovery was still to come. Housekeeping logs confirmed that the bed sheets from the Carter's suite had gone missing sometime between 2 and 3 a.m., The ship's security teams had not removed them. The cleaning staff had not entered. So who took them and why? Investigators had a horrifying theory. Brandon had killed Lillian inside their suite, strangled her in a fit of rage when she threatened to expose him. He had panicked. He needed to cover it up. The missing bed sheets, they believed, had been used to wrap Lillian's body before. He carried her to the balcony. He hadn't just pushed her. He had planned it. Then came the final bombshell. Brandon had taken out a $1.5 million life insurance policy on Lillian just 4 months before the wedding. He was the sole beneficiary. It was highly unusual for a healthy 27-year-old woman to have such a high-value policy, unless, of course, her husband had planned for her not to live long enough to use it. But that wasn't all. When investigators dug deeper into Brandon's life, they found another connection: Amanda Langley, a 28-year-old paralegal from Miami who had worked at Brandon's law firm. At first, Amanda denied any involvement, claiming that their relationship had been strictly professional. But then came the revelation that shattered her alibi completely. Amanda Langley had booked a solo cruise on the Ocean Mirage the same week, the same ship. She had been there just a few decks away while Lillian Carter disappeared. At that moment, the case against Brandon Carter was no longer just circumstantial. The affair, the life insurance, the missing bed sheets, the blood on the balcony, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. Lillian Carter had never left that suite alive, and Brandon Carter had made sure of it. By May 20, 2011, the illusion of innocence had collapsed. The investigation had gathered enough evidence, and the truth was no longer just a suspicion, it was undeniable. Brandon Carter was arrested in Miami, charged with first-degree murder. The man who once stood in front of a room full of people, promising to love and protect his wife, was now fighting to save himself. The trial began in March 2012, and from the moment the prosecution laid out its case, the courtroom was spellbound. The jury listened as forensic experts detailed the blood traces on the balcony, the missing bed sheets, and the surveillance footage showing the last known moments of Lillian Carter. They heard from witnesses, passengers who saw the fights, the slap, the drinking alone, the fear in her eyes. But the most damning evidence came from Lillian's own words. The note hidden in her handbag, written just 2 days before she vanished. "If something happens to me, tell my sister Gina I was right. Tell her I knew the truth about Brandon. Tell her I knew everything." The defense tried to paint Brandon as a wrongly accused husband, claiming that Lillian had been troubled, reckless, possibly suicidal. But the jury didn't believe it. The evidence was overwhelming. Brandon Carter had the means, the motive, and the opportunity. By March 28, 2012, after only 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty. Brandon's face remained emotionless as the judge sentenced him to life in prison, without parole. Amanda Langley, the woman who had been on the same cruise, was never charged. There was no direct evidence linking her to the crime. But her career was destroyed, her name forever tied to a murder she claimed she had nothing to do with. Despite the conviction, one haunting question remained. Lillian Carter's body was never found. The Ocean Mirage continued to sail, carrying new honeymooners, new couples chasing their dream vacations. But those who knew the truth understood that somewhere in those waters, Lillian Carter was still out there. Some crimes end with an arrest. Some end with a conviction. But some killers leave behind a ghost that never truly rests. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more jaw-dropping true crime stories. Coming up next, the shocking case of a husband who buried his wife and best friend in concrete after discovering their affair. Stay tuned.